Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, I'm in Chicago, welcoming back Kristina Rogers, Global Consumer Industries Leader, Retail for EY. We catch up talking about the tradecraft of global consulting in the COVID era and beyond, lessons learned and observed advising clients around the world, and we get a glimpse into the post-COVID retail consumer from both a global and a Canadian perspective, thanks to EY's Future Consumer Index.
Well, I think, some organizations they prove themselves to be much more agile and nimble than we expected. So especially retailers who were able to, pretty quickly pivot to all of the things that are kind of common today, using stores as warehousing and picking and curbside pickup and all of those things. So, I've been particularly impressed by a few organizations who I think just did a tremendous job of repurposing their assets and really figuring this out. One of the more interesting ideas, and it just gets you thinking about what the art of the possible. I heard some of my colleagues in China were telling us about a very large organization.
Let's listen in now. Kristina, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast, or should I say welcome back to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm actually great. Thank you. It's good to be back. I think it's been, a year or two.
You know what? I was looking back through the calendar. You and I sat down at the World Economic Forum in Vancouver, and it's summer, I think, 2019. So I think that's the last time you and I, A, it's the first time we met, and B, it's the last time you and I talked. So it's long overdue. Thank you so much for making some time. I've been following the work that you've been doing, so it's great. It's a great opportunity. For the folks who may not have heard our first interview, why don't we start at the beginning? Tell us about yourself and your background and what you do at EY.
So in my role, I am the Global Consumer Industries Leader at EY, and that the three sectors that fall in there are consumer products, retail, and agribusiness. And a good part of my role is setting the strategy globally for EY in those industries. So really taking a view of where do we want to be making investments for priority geographies? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right approach? Do we have the right solutions to be taking to our clients who need to be served there? Another part of the role, which I really appreciate and value, is thinking ahead. So thinking about what are the trends in those industries, what challenges are our clients going to be facing, what opportunities do we see, and out of that, how do we think about better helping and guiding our clients to both capitalize on opportunities and take the challenges in the future head on. So lots of moving parts, of course, over the last year and a bit, as the future of so many things kind of hit us right in the face over the last year.
No kidding. Now you're a Canadian working globally. You're based in the U.S. right now. Is that still the case?
That is still the case, and I am based just outside of Chicago, and it doesn't feel like the work is as global as it used to be. Of course, it still is, but I haven't been on a long-haul flight for quite some time, as you would probably guess, and who knows what that will look like in the future.
I got to ask you about that from your tradecraft perspective, because I imagine someone in your role at that level, a global organization, would see an airport or two on an average annual basis. What's it like? Like, personally, you travel less. In some ways, maybe that's more productive. Maybe there's some challenges. And B, just how do you run the book of business and work with clients? Have you found it better, the same? How do you talk about that for a bit? I'm really curious, because you're just at that extreme, not that extreme, but you travel a lot. And I'm just curious what your life is like now.
Well, I think you're right. It was extreme. So sometimes when I look back, I would see that, I had, been in Dubai, and 2 weeks later been in Tokyo, but had been at home in the meantime, and then was in London for some meetings. And, in some ways it was a bit crazy.
Road warrior, right? You're a road warrior, man.
Road warrior. Yeah. But the most of my career has been outside of North America. So that is actually something I do enjoy because it's wonderful to just be in other cultures, understand how those, the ways of working and how we get things done in those places, and hopefully have a nice meal and see something different. That always doesn't work out, but it's been a little challenging, of course. The thing that I'm happy about is because I had done a lot of traveling, certainly working with our teams around the world, I had a good relationship with those people,
Right.
and I knew those people. So transitioning to video platforms or conference calls or whatever we've had to do in the last 15 months or so wasn't as challenging because I had made the investments of getting to know people and being there in person with teams. And so, I'm very grateful, despite the fact that I look back and also wonder, was that, a great way to be living? From a professional perspective, it was absolutely, a terrific investment that I had made in building those global relationships. Really come in handy.
Yeah, big, strong foundation, both on the client side and with your colleagues. Now, let's stick on that point for a little bit. How do you see things in the future? I mean, this is a big topic for everyone. Not necessarily, will I travel the world again? But for retailers and everyone, we're thinking about what's the workplace going to look like. I often hear hybrid, the hybrid approach. But I on the buyer side, I was talking to some retailers about, they've saved literally millions of dollars by their buyers, their merchants, not doing big buying trips over to China. In the short term, it's very similar to what you're saying, because in the short term, they say, listen, it's great with existing vendors. We get on Zoom and we can manage the relationship quite well. It's a little harder to find new and build new relationships. How do you see post-COVID? We can kind of see the end zone to the end of all this. The goalposts seem to keep moving, but we can kind of see the end zone. So there's an end point. How are you guys thinking about what that's going to look like? And I guess that's A, in your world, and then B, how are your clients thinking about how they're going to work in the future? I'm just kind of curious. Before we get to talk about this great report, I just really want to follow this thread for a bit.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think as a professional service organization, EY has really taken a step back and tried to reimagine, how we come together. People have there's many benefits, of course, to working from home. There's no commute. You have more personal time, although I think that's faded. I think people have managed to fill their work days in those hours that might have been personal time. So I do think here we're really trying to reimagine, well, how do we team? When should we be in the office? How do you keep a corporate culture? But there's also opportunity out of all this to do something really different and to do a reset of sorts. And so, I know the leadership of our firm is really thinking about what that could look like. And out of it, in terms of positives, we've been able to make some carbon neutrality commitments because I think we basically said, we were doing all that travel as a firm. We don't really need to. We've got to reimagine what will take its place. And of course, there will be some, but, in many ways, it's given an opportunity to just, think a few things over. And I think that extends to our clients as well. They're also trying to figure out, we've actually been able to run a FMCG company from everyone being not in the office. So what can we learn from that? And how can we really create some benefit or some new ways of working coming out of it? I don't think I'd be surprised to, anybody just goes right back to being in the office as soon as everything's opened.
I think the opposite is also true, right? I think anyone who thinks everyone's going back to the office and no one going back to the office is wrong on both counts, right? I think it's somewhere in between. I did this interview with an author, Amory Sawyer, and he wrote a book called The Myth of Experience. And the worry is we learn the wrong things from this era. and I was talking to someone else about this yesterday. I mean, listen, sure, business continued, but really I've never experienced, I want to get your insight on this. I've never experienced such a galvanizing event where there's now a mission, right? Every organization had a mission, right? You know how hard it is to galvanize an organization. Now we were all aligned to the same mission, right? Which was, survive, do what we need to do to get through the COVID era. When that mission goes away, I guess we have to be careful not to learn the wrong lessons. Like as in, hey, business was great and we didn't spend the money we spent before. Yeah, okay. But, A, there's some tailwinds, and B, it wasn't a normal time. Like, I guess that's the challenge that you'll be helping clients figure out, now and in the years to come, right?
I think that's well said, because I remember back this time last year, or let's say May or June 2020, and all the things we thought we were, learning, and we were observing the kind of evil ways that, things that we'd been doing before the lockdowns, and we've had time to reflect and reconsider. And people were making all sorts of personal commitments or, commercial commitments and so on. And you're right. I wonder if we kind of went back and unpacked, that. Have we learned has that learning carried through a year on? I would hope that there's some very solid and imaginative leadership in these organizations and to be cognizant and self-aware that there's a real danger of doing what you just said.
Well, and you and I have lived through an experience not of this scale, but similar once before with 9/11, right? And, we're not going to get on airplanes and it's all going to be video calls. And, within a few years, it went back to record amounts of travel. Anyway, no need to kind of continue to talk about that. I mean, it's so fascinating. I love to talk about it. What kind of things are your clients now asking you about in terms of, when they say, listen, we're a year into the COVID era, we can see the end point, but we're trying to understand what we're trying to, is it how to nearshore a supply chain that seems so rigid that it broke when it's stretched? Is it, we don't understand what consumers are talking about now? Is it, what are the top kind of issues that when your phone rings or the Zoom camera comes on, what are you being asked?
I think you hit two of them. So certainly our supply chain practice globally across all of those three sectors has really exploded, and we've been challenged to just keep up with the discussions and the work to help the organizations, help our clients reimagine what that could look like, and take the opportunity to, if they've been wanting to do something different, if they've been wanting to digitize their supply chain, if they've been wanting to add autonomous planning, things of that nature,
now's the time, right?
The opportunity broke wide open, so you might as well reimagine it, because what came to light was what was there was stress tested and in many cases broke down. So that's been probably for other professional services firm or anyone in that space, a clear winner in terms of where we're doing work. I would say you mentioned consumer behavior. That is absolutely a clear issue for companies, retailers, and consumer products companies to really try and get their arms around now. What has changed, what is changing, what will stick, what doesn't stick. And I think that manifests itself for us in conversations around data and analytics. So, companies really having to take a look at the data they have. Do they have master data? Why don't they? Are they using it in a strategic way? How are they, taking insights from that to really apply and think about where the future consumer is doing and where they're going? And are they, set up to address their needs?
Through all this time, what can you call out, if you can think of any things that stands out in your mind of particular innovation? I half think that the innovation is yet to come. In other words, I know here in Canada, I'm in Toronto. We're in stay-at-home orders. Stores are locked down, so I'm not sure how much innovation is necessarily happening. You just can't figure out if your store is going to be allowed to open on a day-to-day basis. But I feel like it could unleash innovation. Have you, during the past year, seen, if you have a couple examples, something that really jumped out at you that was a really innovative approach from your clients, or something you've just seen in the marketplace?
Well, I think, some organizations they prove themselves to be much more agile and nimble than we expected. So especially retailers who were able to, pretty quickly pivot to all of the things that are kind of common today, using stores as warehousing and picking and curbside pickup and all of those things. So, I've been particularly impressed by a few organizations who I think just did a tremendous job of repurposing their assets and really figuring this out. One of the more interesting ideas, and it just gets you thinking about what the art of the possible. I heard some of my colleagues in China were telling us about a very large organization, FMCG company, who turned their employees into their sales force during this time. So not the sales people, but say you and I, right? We're the marketing people or the accountants or whatever, but we have a phone in our hand. We have we have an apartment or we have a home. So, they had products that they were selling in their neighborhoods. And I thought, well, that's interesting. That's a way to redeploy your workforce using the technology. So presumably they were all kitted out with the right apps and, connection to, depositing money and tracking this SKUs they were selling. And so this was sort of, I thought, a very innovative approach to, the old neighborhood selling, because, the company had distribution trucks, they had product, but they just had nowhere for people to necessarily get hold of them. And so, for me, I was thinking, well, how could you repurpose a workforce? What could you do with technology that we're not thinking about today? And I think if we reflect on some of these kind of odder things that companies did, I bet you there's some really good ideas out of it.
Well, you mentioned the key word in my mind, and that's agility, right? And I think that's the thing that a lot of people or a lot of CEOs say, I hope we can bottle what we did and keep it going when the mission fades. Thankfully, the mission's going to fade. So how do we keep that fast decision making? Like, how do we, as you know, many organizations, probably yourselves included, suddenly everybody's working at home in a week, and you've probably been mulling it about for years, right? Shit, is it a good idea? Is it not? And curbside pickup, another good example, right? Where a lot of retailers kind of mulled it about, and let's make it happen next week. How about that? So that agility part, I think you really rang the bell there for me there. That part is really, how to keep that mindset and philosophy and culture, right? It's really about culture. Agility, I feel, is a lot about culture. What do you think?
Yeah, it is. And I think that that entrepreneurial flair for fast fail. So sometimes being agile might be disastrous. Hopefully not, in a too big of a way.
Hopefully it's short-lived, right? It's a short-lived disaster.
And not big. But I think, you're right to say a lot of organizations that we work with, they're really trying to reevaluate. What does it mean to be in that role? What kind of KPIs do you have? Are you able to? Do you have the latitude to do the type of thing that we've been doing over the past year? People moved quickly into, doing all sorts of things. That wasn't the norm before necessarily for large organizations. Yeah. So you're right. Some of them have been probably pleasantly surprised to see that their workforce and their operations could pivot quickly into something different.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were pleasantly surprised and proud of their organizations. And again, how do we bottle that? So that we don't need a crisis to change, right? How do we get that same kind of vibe without a global crisis? Because I think we've had enough of that for our lifetimes. All right, well, let's talk about the Consumer Future Index. Have I got that right? The Consumer Future Index.
Future Consumer Index.
There you go. Future Consumer Index. I was actually reading that a couple of weeks ago, so it was a great coincidence that you guys reached out and said, "Hey, let's talk about it again." Great piece of work, great body of work. First of all, tell us about the body of work itself, like how it's accumulated and what you're tracking, and then let's dive into some of the stats. Hopefully, I see you have some stuff on Canada. What have you learned, and talk about the segmentation. But again, first, what is it? How do you pull it together? And let's start there.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to. And actually, the journey towards this probably started about 3.5 years ago, when I might have mentioned this when we spoke before. I had launched a global body of work called Future Consumer Now, and that was really trying to get EY, and by extension our clients, some scenarios, points of view for different parts of the world about how consumers would want to live in the future. And that means not just what they buy, but how are they going to manage their health, get to work, learn, work out, get around towns, etc. And it was pretty futuristic at the time, I have to say, Michael. And people kind of poo-pooed it in some ways and said, nothing, if there's no 5G, half of the stuff you're talking about won't happen.
A little too touchy-feely, right? A little too out there.
It was pretty out there. We did a number of.
What do I do with it? What do I do with this information?
But the practicality of it is that we had 150 drivers of change. So when we worked with clients, we would have them select a portfolio of drivers that they felt was most relevant to their business and play it out. What if this happened? How do things accelerate? And I kid you not, one of the 50 drivers was global pandemic, but nobody ever selected it. That's I 100% can tell you that. So frankly, from my perspective, last March, when my kids' school was canceled, everything was closed. It looked like the zombie apocalypse out there. I just said, here it is. So we need to track the change in behavior and understand, how quickly change is going to accelerate. And I want to track this. I don't know how long it's going to carry on, but I definitely know our behaviors are going to change as consumers, and we as EY need to understand that so that we can help our clients understand that. So last April, we quickly went into the field in 5 countries, Canada being one. A little nostalgia on my part, I think, that I selected.
Thank you for serving our market. Yes. We're not the biggest market.
But I also thought our clients would want a view of Canada and the U.S., especially our any North American-based clients. So, and that we're now on our around cycle 6 of research. So we've been checking in with the consumers all around the world. We're up to 20 countries now. The last 2 cycles, we've had 20 markets, and we're almost 15,000 consumers that we are just tracking and trying to understand what did they say to us, a few cycles ago. Has that changed? Is it different? And where are we? And what can our clients learn from it? And so it's pretty fascinating, actually, just to understand what's different in different parts of the world. Obviously very different when you look at that data for China versus, North America.
That's the irony, right? I mean, China, we thought we could learn a lot of lessons from China, but they were through the pandemic in months, not years. Like, I don't know anymore what we can learn from China from that perspective, but other places are going to be there longer. But let's talk about Canada. You one of the things I'm looking at this, that the report now talked about some segmentation, and you say, okay, there's 4 consumer segments during the COVID crisis. Walk me through your approach and what those segments are.
Well, I think, that's actually something has changed a little bit, because when we first start, the first 2 rounds of data, we thought we could see some things emerging. And we've been just, playing around with the data we have every time to say, is this segmentation sticking? What are we actually seeing? Is this going to make sense? And so I would say even some of it is still, especially in Canada, to be honest, because I was in Canada last summer. I drove over the border. I did my quarantine with my family, and I felt like I had left what was a big mess in the United States.
Yeah. The worm has turned on that a little bit.
Yes, and so Canada just seemed to be so on track, and I was happy to be there. And so in terms of, I would expect that we're going to keep an eye just on where things are falling out there, maybe even much longer than we are, looking at that research in other markets, because I think, there's still change to come. Yeah. And I think the sentiment out of what you're experiencing there now is going to be very different if, the longer this goes on. So I actually think in other markets, we're probably going to pull back a bit, but in Canada, we're going to stay the course because of just what you're experiencing there. So I will come back to you, Michael, with where we think this is really shaking out.
Well, it is the kind of literally the $1 billion question, and it gets back to something we were talking at the beginning of our discussion: is what can you actually learn? I mean, the times are so unusual, the behaviors. I mean, the savings rate you guys track. One of your segments is save and stockpile. The savings rate in Canada is crazy, but it's enforced. Like, I can't go anywhere. I can't. I'm going to stay at home, and if you live in Quebec, you're under a curfew. So, can we really learn about consumer behavior? It feels like, and I want to get your implication. You've looked at this data. You know it so well that there'll be this burst of activity post-vaccine. Let's call it fall for easy math. That we, again, won't be able to learn anything really from, because people will be just jonesing to get out and go shopping and do all these things, and it'll be pent-up demand, revenge shopping, I've heard that title, or whatever. And then it'll settle out a year from there, where the longer lasting implications. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, you're combing through this data, you're watching it move around. It's kind of like sticking Jell-O to a wall, I'm sure, some days, based on the changing circumstances. How do you think that's going to work out?
Well, it's a really fascinating one, because you wonder, people have been home. Is it all pent up? I think some of the things we're seeing are, out of the data, and this is the global data, not necessarily the specific Canadian data, but, there's also some recognition that maybe we can live with less.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So I've been at home. I've been monitoring my shopping. I'm if I've migrated online, especially, grocery purchases, I may be now just, stuck with my past purchase list there. I hardly ever explore for new things because
bad news for brands, right? I mean, how do you get new ideas and freshness in when people are happy with what they got? Interesting.
Right. I mean, but so that's one thing. I think the other thing we've been exploring is, the notion of shopping versus buying and that dichotomy. So, a lot of brands or products now, they're more they're more bought. I don't really care to explore them. I don't want to learn about new and improved. I'm not interested. They're just on autopilot. Yeah. So I buy them and I'm not interested in any experience around them.
Right.
I think what you're talking about with the, maybe revenge buying and shopping and so on could be those categories that people still care about having an experience with. So I'm interested in exploring. I'm interested in some sort of sensory experience around it. I'm interested in, what might be new, but that's not every category. And frankly, I think that's more apparel and in that vein, cosmetics, perhaps less so your, FMCG, household products, some foods, may just be very well kind of on autopilot buying now. So I think there's some things to be watching. I wonder, one of the hypotheses I've got my team exploring is, did we actually reach the zenith of consumerism?
That's a good question. It's a great question.
We say it's all going to bounce back in roaring 20s, but what part is bouncing back?
Right? And it's also what's left to buy. My goodness, I just bought it's funny. I just bought a big smoker, a Yoder smoker made out of Kansas, American made, 400 pounds. I'm like, now I have 4 barbecues, by the way. And because I'm home, right? It's a staycation. I can easily justify it because I'm not traveling. But eventually you start running out of stuff to buy. And I had that same thought. Did we break the back of consumerism?
Yeah, I feel like we might have, Michael. I really do, because I also think that there's the segment of people who realize how much waste and junk we create, because that used to be all distributed all around, and then suddenly you and your family were at home,
right?
And you just saw that what you used to maybe throw out at the gym or at school or at work or at the bus stop or, whatever, was all concentrated in your home. And so not everyone, but there's a fairly significant proportion of the population that is reconsidering, this consumerism and its impact and their personal stake in it all. So I think, yes, we'll probably see some spending and on some fun things, right?
Sure,
eating out, vacations, but more experiential. I'm less bullish on things.
Stuff. Well, let's last couple of questions for you. What, if you could so far draw 3 things you've learned, your clients have learned during the COVID era so far, what would those be? I think, for example, you mentioned the benefits of agility. That's for some newfound skill, but anything jump to mind? It's okay. So far, here's what we've learned that we just didn't know, and that's important to us.
I think if I think about the consumer end of it, so the consumer data and the way we're talking about it with clients, one thing I would say is, they've got to really start thinking about meeting consumers where they are. Right. So not where the business is or not in traditional retail or, that's all been blown apart and broken. So, the clients I work with, we're talking about how do you redesign, the business processes to meet, consumers where they are, how they live. Rather
and how
than,
they shop is going to be different, right? Because if let's pick a number, 2/3 of people go back to the office, 1/3 of people are shopping differently. And that's a big number, right? That's locally, that's a big number no matter what, right?
Well, and I think that the whole system of, marketing to us was, I'll do that or I'll make the transaction, where you buy. So whether that was a physical store or maybe some linear pathway online. But that's all changed. I mean, especially for younger generations, they want they want you to reach out to them where they are, not have to go where you are. Right. And that's a very different model than what these organizations are set up for today. So I think, that's something that we're observing and trying to think through with our clients. What does that really mean? The other thing I would say is, as much as, you and I just talked about everyone's itching to get out, we want to have dinners and, go to party. we're also seeing through our research that at-home living is here to stay, right? Our home is our hub. We've learned how to work at home. Kids have learned how to learn at home. We've learned how to do telemedicine from home. We've learned how to stay fit and healthy at home. And, that's not going anywhere. That, for me, and I think some of our data and research confirms it. So what does that really mean, right? What are people doing at home? And as an organization, what are your products and services, right? Do you fit in?
Right.
And a lot of the spending, I think will be on people's homes.
It's fascinating. Listen, it's fascinating work. I could talk to you about this for hours, and I'd love to have you back on, later in the year as things start to sort out and we start to see how consumers are thinking and how your clients are thinking. In the interim, where can listeners go and find the best source of information about the reports we've been talking about? Where can they go find that stuff?
EY.com is a great place. So if anyone is looking for some of our index data specifically and content and thoughts and ideas that we've written about that, you can always find that on EY.com under the Consumer Industries tab or Consumer or Future Consumer Index. And specifically in Canada, the CA EY.com stroke Canada, there will be specific content there for the Canadian market. So it's pretty simple.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks for doing that. I'll put that link in the show notes. And you're on LinkedIn, I suppose. People can catch up with you there and all the things.
I am on LinkedIn, and I do, put my musings there about, what we're seeing in the Future Consumer Index. So sure. Right on.
All right. Well, listen, thanks so much for making time. It was great to catch up. Way too long. Maybe one day we'll see each other again in person at a conference if we can remember what those were. But in the interim, it was so great to hear your voice again and catch up. And thanks for taking the time to chat with the Voice of Retail.
Oh, it was nice to be back. Thanks.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Voice of Retail. Be sure and follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts so you don't miss out on the latest episodes, industry news, and insights. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a rating review, as it really helps us grow so that we continue to get amazing guests onto the show. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc., and if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at emmyleblanc.co. Until next time, stay safe, have a great week.